skills may not be that good, but at least they will have this particular skill that they're good at and things like that. You got a lot of people, when you go back in the history, some of our older people, not the younger people, y'all would understand we couldn't read, but that didn't mean that we couldn't do this particular job. Okay? We had the skill for that particular job. And we got to look at all of those different things. Again, that's why I said it starts at home. The child learns from 0 to 6. After 6, he knows what's going on. Okay? That's where you have to kind of train them between those ages and everything else. There's a lot of things that they've taken out of school. We kind of need to get with the school system again and try to bring some of those things back. A lot of y'all may remember the 4-H club. Don't see that. Kids out on the streets now because, hey, it used to be all these after-school things. We don't have them anymore. First thing, I hate to say it, but I got started in this day when they took prayer out. And when they took prayer out, the Pledge of Allegiance, hey, they took all of these things out of school, whereas kids and young people had things to do. This new generation that we have, they don't have any of those amenities and things. I could commend you, because I have a lot of different program things that you do, okay, to keep them out of the streets. You got to make sure our libraries are open. You got to make sure our community centers are doing different things to bring them there, keeping them out the street. But if we got all these, like in the neighborhoods that we have, you got all this blight, everybody talk about blight. You got people that have passed on, their loved ones are not here in the city. So all of these homes are out there, you have all that blight. We got to make sure when it comes down to our environmental court, all of them, hey, we got to make some different rules where it gives them time. And while I was on the council at one time, hey, we tried to give these different incentives on all of that, okay? And those are some of the things that we need to kind of do and bring back, and I think it would help.
In order to compete with the streets, once again, 40% of our Memphis youth live in poverty. So I think, and this is one of the programs that I would like to implement once I become a councilman, I would like to create a youth council. And within that youth council, we would like to get a youth from every district in the city to sit on this council, and the youth tell us what can we do to assist them. Because we've had our council right now, they can't relate to the youth. And we can't make decisions for a generation we can't relate to. This is the first time in history we have 5 generations living with each other. And so now it's time for generations to begin to groom and mentor people, but they're not doing that. They're continually trying to run for office, push these old, antiquated ideas, and they're not working. We have to be more proactive instead of reactive. And one of the other things I would like to push is a capacity building within the council. Our people have been suffering from financial literacy, from reading, and we have to get those things back in order. And so we have to do capacity building within our district to work and help our people. And also, we have to push this living wage. My father had some issues late in his life, and he's going through some changes right now. And he works at Graceland right now. And we're pushing $15 an hour, and Graceland pays my father $11 an hour right now. And so that's a shame. You have this company with this big pallet break, which councils have approved. Current council members ain't passed, approved for Graceland, but they're still paying these people under $15 an hour. So how can we compete with the streets when you're paying an individual $11 an hour when you have youth and older people working at Graceland? So in order to compete with these streets, we have to do these things and be very innovative and intentional with everything we're trying to do to protect and raise up a new generation.
Theryn, we'll go this way. 3 more people.
That's fine already. So we already have a Memphis City Council, Youth Council. They presented at City Council, I believe, at least 2 or 3 times. The reason I know that is because I've been at the meetings, every meeting for the past 2 years, with the exception of being in the hospital. But what we have to do is we have to talk to them. We have to talk and then stop and really listen. We have to find out what gets them out of bed in the morning, what their interests are, what they're passionate about. Help them to integrate their passion into a career. You mentioned a drug dealer. To be a good drug dealer, you have to be personable, you have to know how to count money, you have to price a product, and you have to be able to market it via word of mouth. These are skills that when you apply them in a legal space, lead to prosperity. So if we figure out what they like to do, it can also become what they get paid to do legally. And that comes from talking to them continuously and listening.
Right.
Okay, well, I'm going to go off Theryn, I'm going to go off Davin, and I'm going to go off Mr. Bond over there. I always use myself as an example of what I've seen in the city. Now, I'm a South Memphis born child, Norris Elementary, Corey Junior High. I started at Corey Junior High in fall of 1989. We had a shop program, a small auto mechanics program, we had home economics, we had all these different things. Came back from my 8th grade year, everything was gone. And I'm not talking about phased out over time, I'm talking about over the summer, all of those programs were taken out of Corey. I didn't get interested in school until I was bused because of desegregation busing that was still happening even then. I was bused to Overton for high school. When I stepped foot into Overton, I stepped foot into a performing arts program, I stepped into a broadcasting program, all of these different things, all of these clubs and everything that any child could be interested in, they had. And even then, Overton was predominantly black, so they were beginning to cut the budgets at that school as well. So when we talk about beating the streets, how are you going to beat the streets and you're not showing them anything other than the streets? You're telling these children, just like you told me, that because of the neighborhood that you're from, this is all that's good for you. Now, I've gone on, I just got back from Milan, Italy this year, still doing music. I've been to Germany, Austria, all these other places. Because but I still had to leave my neighborhood that my parents worked hard to get. I'm still in my father's house 60 years later. He was a retired postal worker and a Korean War veteran. My mama was a seamstress. I had to leave. And this is not new. These problems that we're talking about in this room, they're not new. They have been going on and existing in this city for generation upon generation. And see, now because we didn't heal up the wound then, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the wound has gotten deeper. And so now we do have 2 or 3 generations that are used to that all they see is the street, because that's all we've given them is access to the street. Because we're telling them that because you don't have enough money, you're not worthy to get these programs. And then like Theryn said, sit down and talk to these children. When I got to Overton, we had an old black teaching population, and that's all they did was talk to us. And they got in our tails when we needed them. But we trusted them enough because they showed us, they listened to us, and they did all these things. Coming out of the school system, I taught for 4 years. Teachers aren't allowed to do that. They show us videos about how not to touch a child, or how not to do this, how not to be personal. You can't do this. Our teachers fed us when we were hungry. Guess what I couldn't do? I couldn't give that child food. So it's like we're dealing with all of these issues from generation. They're compounded, and we have to deal with them. But the only way that you're going to beat the streets with a lot of these children is show them an alternative. Don't just throw them a ball. Just don't throw them a football. Just don't throw them a basketball. Some of them like computers. Some of them like music. Some of them like all these other things. But we don't do that. We drop them off. If we do have computers in the school, we drop them off and just tell them to play.
Jaques?
Yeah. Jaques Hamilton, Memphis City Council, District 6. How can we beat the streets? Great question. With that being said, 2 things. One is the general fund, which is the city council's budget, where the citizens, that's basically the local taxpayer dollars, where the city council has the opportunity to allocate funds to different things such as public safety, community development, youth development. So I say that we have to go about reallocating our funds within the general fund, which is 1. And then 2, from a federal grant standpoint, we have what they call opportunity zones. Memphis has a lot of opportunity zones, particularly we have a number of them in District 6. And so the federal government gives you tons of money to be able to redevelop your community, from youth development to community development to economic development. Once again, I'm the only candidate that has an education and a workforce development background. When we start to talk about allocation, the reason why education is low is because of the budget, which everyone is discussing. So we have to reallocate those funds from the general fund to education. Also, when you start to talk about as far as workforce development, the issue has 2 things to do with workforce development: soft skills training and as well as hard skills training. When you start to think about soft skills training, that's when just basic soft skills, from communication skills to just showing up on time to work, different things of that nature, which helps with sustainability within employment, which leads to what we like to call within workforce development, is called on-the-job training. And so on-the-job training is where the federal government gives local government money to be able to give companies the opportunity to be able to train these young people, the ages of 16 or 24, which are currently disconnected. So once again, the only way that we are going to be able to beat the streets is that we have to understand the general fund, which City Council has a decision on to be able to reallocate funds, and two, the opportunity zone, which is federal dollars.
Ted, you're up next.
I want to ask a question about economic development. The city for a number of years has used pilots as a way to build the tax base. What do you think about this? Are pilots the way to build the tax base, or is there another way to go forward and create tax base?
Let me say this, let me just be real frank about pilots. I think there should be some limitations and some caps placed on pilots. If you can imagine, and I'll use my former company, Federal Express, if they were ever to come from under pilot and start paying taxes, do you know how much the tax base would be broadened and how much revenue would come into the city as a result? There has to be a cap on pilots. We've seen, I can't think of the company that's also located in District 6 that left. Electrolux. So I'm not sure that pilots on a long-term basis are the way to go, because we're never going to probably ever get the full benefit from corporate America that comes under pilot. We're never going to get the full benefit. The neighborhoods around Electrolux, which is where I grew up, which I understand exactly what Frank's talking about, because if you look at parts of District 6, District 6 is pretty much the dumping ground for what the rest of the city doesn't want. We've been successful in getting chemical companies closed on Mallory, but there are people still living in District 6 today that swear they have been poisoned over the years, either through the water or through the soil. So you don't see the revenue influx from pilots and other economic situations coming to District 6, and that's disturbing for those who are still living in District 6. No matter where you live in District 6, you can always find a nice little pocket in District 6. But if the masses aren't benefiting, then there's something wrong, and it's broken. And if it's broken, it needs to be fixed.
So when we talk about pilots and tips, the first thing we have to do is be intentional about attracting companies to all parts of the city and not just downtown, which a large part does resolve in District 6. And then we also have to make sure that these companies provide livable wages, a safe work environment, and good benefits. And also make sure that we have community benefits agreements in place that includes a significant percentage of employees be hired within the zip code that it plans to land in.
Yeah. Well, I consider pilots and tips, I consider those a rebranding of Reaganomics. Because in both plans, what do? We take taxpayer money and we give it to a bunch of rich people and hope that they come into our communities and, let it rain down on us. But we've seen over the last 40 years through Reaganomics that they find new ways to keep the money. Now, like Mr. Bond just said, if FedEx pays taxes tomorrow, we could solve a lot of these ills that we're talking about. I don't know, and I think that we have been so conditioned through corporate talk and all these things over the last 40 years that we honestly do not, for us to do this thing a different way other than begging corporations to come save us, it's just become completely foreign to us. Why can't we take taxpayer money and rebuild our infrastructure in the city? We got lead pipes under the ground. And guess what you do? You do that, an infrastructure program, you put people to work, you train people to move those pipes. You take these old houses in this city and you retrofit them. You bring them up to date. Guess what you're going to save on? MLGW bills are going to go down because you're going to modernize the home. Then you incentivize people to move back into these neighborhoods, to stay in the city. But what do? We give tips and we give pilots, we give it, and what they do, they come in, they stay a couple of years like Electrolux, and then they pack up and leave. What if we create a pilot and a tip program for our actual small black-owned businesses in this city? Let them expand. Instead of waving down the Cheesecake Factory to come to Memphis, let's expand Cheesecake Corner right here on G.E. Patterson and see what happens with that. Now, old Memphis was built on small black-owned businesses. I know this because I come from a family that owned 3. So why can't we do that? Why do we have to take our money that we put into the pot to benefit us? We have to take it and give it away to a corporation that's not going to stay or show any loyalty to us. I mean, that's just my take on that.
Well, also, in my beginning statement, I said about promoting inclusion amongst the major developments here in the city. We have to be intentional with the pilot program by reassessing it and make sure that companies that come into the city are tailored around the community needs. And so we have to get the community involved. And I believe we should have the communities on these boards to make these decisions with the pilot program. Let them be more vocal and stop having these closed door meetings, because these are our tax dollars and we have to be intentional. And so that's another reason why we need innovative people on the council who are not afraid to speak up, and we cannot continue the same pattern of the council. Everyone spoke about the other issues with the pilot program, and you know, I am for a pilot program, but I do agree the small black businesses, we can work with the FedExes and the international papers to get them to hire people within these districts a percentage more than 50%. And so we have to be intentional, and we're not intentional. We're very reactive in government, like I said before, not proactive. So once again, promoting community inclusion amongst these major developments will be the only way we can get this city to grow and to combat poverty here in Memphis, Tennessee.
We'll go around the room if you have a comment on this. Again, you don't have to, it's an option. Okay.
Yeah. Talking about the pilot program, there's nothing wrong with the pilot program. We have to give incentives, reasons why, because who we board around and all like that. When I served on the council before, when it comes down to the pilot program, we put stipulations in there. If you want to come and be part of the city of Memphis, this is what you have to do. You just can't come in and get our money in 2 years. You decide you want to leave and go across the line. A lot of them used to do that, so we put stipulations in there, okay? Since I left, they kind of removed those stipulations, okay? We were talking about Electrolux. Electrolux is not closed, okay, right this minute. It's closing. And the reason why it's closing, and that comes from the federal government, okay? Because the parts that they need, they can't get. I have 3 employees that work for me on the weekend that works for Electrolux. You know, they may go to work today, they can't work tomorrow because we don't have the parts. That has hurt, you know, when it comes down to pilot programs. But again, what we don't need to really look at pilot programs, we need to look at incentives for these small businesses here in the city of Memphis. That would make a difference. Okay, we need to kind of help and give them the incentives, because if you small business try to open, once they get all these different little bitty taxes, I need to close because I can't afford it. So we need to give them some of the incentives where they can stay. Because, you know, I'm in business, but you know, there's a tax that you have to pay every year, and I always thought things do depreciate, but I guess they don't. And what that tax is, that used to be a personal property tax, it's a personality tax. And that's a tax for my furnishings. You know, here, y'all probably got the same thing. You know, it may be 0.5 sound good, but when it comes down to the city, and especially in our community, especially if somebody want to try to open a business, they can't, because once I get all these little taxes and what I'm trying to sell, I can't make it. So I have to close. So we need to come back and give them some of the incentives where they can stay. Big corporations, fine, I can help them, but I got to have a stipulation on that. But we need to come back with some of these small businesses, especially in our districts and some of these lower. And that would bring things back, plus it might get rid of some of this poverty, it may get rid of some of these houses that's been just a blight, whereas, hey, people are coming out. But all of those, it's a lot of things that we can do, and especially in neighborhoods. That's where CDCs come in at. If you get with the CDCs and all these community associations that work, when it comes down to the council, we work through the CDC, where the CDC will go in that particular area and help and make sure these things are happening in this community, going through the CDCs. And there's a couple of new CDCs that opened, and that's what we need to try to get with them, make sure they get these different associations, they're in districts, and help.
Correct.
For me, I think as a city councilman, taking a broader look or more microscopic look at how the pilot programs work in Memphis. They come, they stay 2 or 3 years like everybody here knows, and they're gone. They get the tax breaks and they're out of here. But my feeling is that if we can get them to reinvest in our community a lot more than they already do, to make our community more inclusive. We have troubles in our community that are broader than a lot of people know. Make our LGBTQ community, homeless, veterans, youth, so many different opportunities where tips and tax incentives can help our communities, and make it dependent upon those companies to reinvest in those communities in that aspect. Working toward high wages, I think, will be a broader view, not just a minimum wage, but a living wage. Increasing minority and women business-owned companies, helping to create more jobs in the community, as well as revitalizing our blighted properties in the community, not just the homes, but also the businesses, which we know attracts more business to our community. We can reinvest in those communities, fight the blight, and make it more presentable, where it makes Memphis a safer and a more better place to come for our community, as well as people outside our community. I think it'd be a great opportunity.
Sean?
When it comes down to the pilots, I see them as just one vehicle on the way for businesses to come into the city. It's the edge responsibility to look at those incentives, look at the location, look at the jobs, what they're going to actually provide. And they actually make a lot of recommendations. Personally, I think that maybe the edge level of power needs to be addressed. EDGE is an independent body that then directs us, whereas if the council had more direct control over the EDGE action, then we may be able to see some things change. But right now, the EDGE is independent, and both the city council and your county commissioners just listen to their response, and they're the one making a lot of those major recommendations. And I just think that arrangement may need to be addressed.
Brian?
I fully agree that EDGE, the leadership at EDGE has to be in concert with the council, with the mayor, as to what is expected. Once again, we keep going back to budget. We talked about programs that were gone. We talked about programs I'm sponsoring and have, but yet and still we have that element of crime and all these different things, but ultimately we're still talking about a budgetary factor when we're saying the money isn't there. It's coming back to money. I'm hearing this from all of my fellow peers. When I look at the pilot program, I look at it in two phases. One, I own a company here. And I'm probably one of the few people in this city that's African American that's actually received state tax credits to develop in this city. So I know a little bit about what it means to have inducements to actually build something. I want to get back, and what I would push for is going towards what some of my colleagues mentioned, pushing EDGE to help create incentives for local businesses. Ideally in the technology space. The industries are changing today. You know, the Industrial Revolution, now we have what I consider to be a technology revolution. And it's imperative that we have the incentives to say, well, you know, let's get on the track of one day being the Silicon Valley of the South, and we want that in Memphis. That's a big idea, but even if we just hit 10% of it, that's a wonderful goal. I think that could perhaps pull in more youth engagement. They could pull in more of an idea that Memphis is beyond just a city from a warehousing standpoint. You gotta have ingenuity, financial ingenuity to push these programs and to be able to say, now we disperse across board into the COAC program. Now we can disperse into programs that help facilitate families that have a single parent, which in Memphis, it teeters around about 73% in the African American community. That's a huge number. We got to be able to incentivize mentors that are going out and picking up kids that don't belong to them and using their money to take them to the AAU games, to the wherever, football games. And I press that because that's so important. If we know that there's an imbalance family-wise, how can we make it more balanced? If I have, well, I say, well, listen, when I was a kid, Dave came out and picked me up and helped me learn some of those life skills that my absentee dad didn't give me. I know I got a little bit off track there, but again, it's easy peasy for me to a degree because you want to have legislation, you want to have covenants within the pilot program that say, listen, if you leave within 2 years, you got a real strong recapture program. But you still want to induce companies to come and say, Memphis is a great place to be. It truly is. It really is. This is a great place. It's going to get better.
Jacob?
Yes, Jaques Hamilton, Memphis City Council, District 6. With that being said, 3 things. One is accountability. Accountability meaning we cannot roll out the red carpet to businesses, and as well as we have to make sure that there's something in place just in case they do leave early, that we tax them because of them leaving early. The second thing is inclusion. When we start to think about inclusion, everybody plays a role on this assembly line from the front to the back. So having everyone at the table, different community members, constituents, CDCs, neighborhood association representatives at the table to be able to find ways to push more advocacy around pilot programs in their community. And lastly, equity. We start to think about equity, making sure that it's always, like everyone around here stated, supporting small businesses that are currently in our community. So once again, as far as equity, inclusion, and as well as accountability.
Ted, do you have any more questions about economic development? They talk on this issue. You talk on this issue, haven't you? So I've got another question that's a unrelated question to economic development. That is about governance and leadership. As all of you know, because many of you have been involved in previous service, current service, community service of one stripe or another, that the office you're elected for is just one thing. You also have a pulpit to do other things and to lead by both example and to pick areas that you want to champion as a elected official. I just want a short answer, like a minute or so. I'm going to start with Theryn. What area would you want to champion? What would you want to do in this position, whether it's education, community service, youth service, you name it? What would you want to champion?
Well, so what I want to do is be able to have regular town halls in each part of my district and get on a calendar so that we can talk to them and see what every community needs, because one may need a little bit more than the other at this present time. One may need something different later on. The only way I know that is to continue conversation with them. And then as far as leading, making sure I'm involved. If they call and say, speak at their church, make sure I'm available. Speak at their community picnic, make sure I'm available. The same way when I was invited to a Mallard Heights CDC night out, making sure I was there and could show up and talk to people and not just run temporarily and be there because it's election season, and continue to remain visible so that they know I am here for them every step of the way and remaining accessible to them. Because the problem is we see so many when it's election time, but we don't see them throughout the community, and that's what's been really important to them. And also making sure that, it's one thing to discuss what happens in the past and it's one thing to hope for the future, but it's important to maintain a positive experience while we are serving and not get caught up in foolishness, and so we represent our community as well.
Next up, Frank.
Well, okay, so I am, like I said again, a native of South Memphis. I grew up all over South Memphis, but my heart goes to Alcee Ball because that's where I spent the majority of my life. What I want for my community is for my community to be able to function as its own community, a community within a community. And that's a lot like our communities used to do. We should be able to live, work, shop, and play, and get educated and have fun right there where we live. And I want that for all communities in Memphis. And of course I want it for the community that I grew up in. I want us to be able to go back to that real sense, not a corporately created, but a real sense of what community is, where the neighbors knew each other, you know, where we talked and our kids grew up, you know, together. But then at the same time, we didn't have to leave the community to get what we needed. We didn't have to leave the community just to go to the grocery store. And I want that vision back. I want it returned back to the communities like I remember when I was a small child.
Jacob?
Yes, so I would want to champion quality resources, and how I would go about doing that is two ways: through collective impact and as well as development collective impact. When you start to talk about Memphis has a lot of different silos, everybody works in many different groups, and so bringing elected, as far as local elected officials together, state elected officials together within my district, as well as CDCs, businesses, all the way to the nonprofit organizations, the representatives from those different entities. And we start to find ways to work collectively together to be able to push one agenda. And when you start to think about it as far as on the development side, bringing more retail, entertainment, and restaurants into our district, because when you go into District 6, we do not have any retail, entertainment, and restaurants, particularly restaurants from a standpoint of sit-in restaurants for the most part, unless you're thinking about downtown. So retail from a standpoint back to the point of the mall, right, it's low quality. So bringing in quality resources, that's what I would champion.
Cheyenne?
Being Super District 8, you're a position 2 of 3. And within that Super District 8, you have several representatives from the different districts. What I've seen is that oftentimes you have district individuals that's overlapping each other. I would like for us to all be able to come together and have a plan of action so that each one of us are working to address particular issues and not be duplicating so much in that area. It's easy to happen. We have a lot of rules that we have to govern ourselves by under the Sunshine Act. But I do believe that we can get past that and actually come up with grand plans for all the Super District 8 where everybody can benefit from it. I'm one individual with a lot of issues in regards to the 3.0 plan that the city is representing. But when it's all said and done, we need to have a plan. And a lot of the factors that are in those plans is good. We just need to make sure it's applicable to every district that they have outlined in that plan and make sure everybody understands the plan and work in that direction.
We're going to come back to you, Brian, for this question last, but I'll repeat the question briefly, that it's about leadership and governance, and if you're elected to this position, you certainly will be on a body of legislators who deal with